Racist cop sprays paint on elderly black veteran's head. Seconds later, his son shocks everyone. They say justice often comes after a verdict has been rendered. But in Lakehurst that morning, it came after the hiss of spray paint, dry, red, and quieter than death itself. Before we dive into this story, let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It was a Friday morning. No rain, no wind, just golden sunlight falling over a sparsely trafficked street. On a cracked sidewalk running along Main Street, a warped wooden bench sat still, like evidence left behind by time. On it sat Corbin Winston, 79 years old, dark-skinned, deep-set eyes, silent. On his head was a faded cap. The words, Combat Medic, Vietnam 1971, nearly erased. But a man who has seen war doesn't need clear letters, only memory. He didn't smoke, didn't speak. In one hand, he held a plastic bag containing a heart medication bottle, its VA hospital label smudged. The other rested on a worn wooden cane. Every Friday afternoon, he sat there at exactly 4 p.m., not a minute off, like a living clock that refused to stop ticking. No one talked to him, but no one dared to ignore him either. Corbin Winston was a living ghost in this town, not because people feared him, but because they feared what he had survived and brought back with him. Then came a metallic click, the sound of a soda can opening in the middle of the quiet street. A brand-new police cruiser pulled up at the curb. The driver's door swung open. Bernie White, 27, a newly assigned officer, stepped out. High and tight haircut, cheap sunglasses, crooked nameplate, pistol bouncing with each smug step. He spotted Corbin, frowned, then smirked. "Didn't think these stone statues still had enough breath to squat on sidewalks," he said, loudly enough for a pair of college students passing by to turn and look. Corbin said nothing. He simply tilted his head back, eyes following a leaf drifting down from the maple tree outside the barber shop. Everything he had witnessed, bullets slicing past his ears, comrades screaming for their mothers, helicopter rotors wheezing like asthmatic lungs, none of it was louder than the silence he carried within. And that silence irritated Bernie. "This chair yours?" he went on, striding closer, soda can still in hand. "Or do you think this sidewalk's a traveling memorial for jungle-crawling relics from Asia?" Still no response. Suddenly, he shoved the can into his pocket and pulled a can of red spray paint from his belt. "If you're a monument, let me make you look a little more lively." Bernie shook the paint can like it was a weapon. The cold clack-clack of mixing beads echoed with menace. And then, shh! A stream of paint sprayed out, directly onto Corbin's forehead. The red ran through salt and pepper hair, over the rim of the old hat, down deep, hardened wrinkles that had once bled in the trenches. It spread across his motionless face, looking like blood without warmth, like shame without tears. A sharp crack rang out as his wooden cane fell, striking the pavement. It broke in two. The hand-carved words, "Delta Medical Team," etched with a jungle knife decades ago, now face down, buried in street dust and motor oil. It all lasted just 12 seconds. But those 12 seconds were like a courtroom without a judge, without a lawyer, without a sentence. Only one accusation, written in spray paint. "Your honor isn't worth preserving." Across the street, a teenager raised his phone to record. A woman inside the barbershop shouted, "He just got discharged this morning. He's still wearing the medical wristband?" But Bernie only shrugged, as if he'd just tagged an old wall with graffiti. He didn't know. He had just drawn a red mark across the honor of an entire generation. And he especially didn't know. Someone was already walking toward him. No uniform, no weapon. Just one message: to begin rewriting history. U.S. military medics once recognized Corbin Winston as someone who could stop bleeding with bare fingers and a prayer. In 1971, at a smoke-filled battlefield near Hill 689 in Quang Tri, he, then only 25, saved the lives of 6 American soldiers in less than 40 minutes during a continuous artillery barrage from the North Vietnamese. No body armor, no gun, just blood-soaked gauze, an M7 bayonet, and trembling hands from dehydration, he still managed to bring them to the nearest resupply point more than 300 meters away. One of those men later became a general. As for Corbin, no one remembered his face. When he returned from Vietnam, he stepped onto the tarmac at a military airport in Texas in a shirt thinner than the hearts that greeted him. No banners, no music, no parade. Just a redacted line in his military file, blacked out 3 times. Recommendation for review of subordinate insubordination in the field. The reason? He refused a retreat order because a dying white soldier was still lying in the trench. For over 50 years, he lived on the 3rd floor of a walk-up apartment in Elm Street housing, where only the elderly, the disabled, and a few single mothers on assistance lived. His veteran pension, exactly $1,032 a month, wasn't enough for a flat-screen TV, so he listened to AM radio. The static played old Nixon-era speeches, reports of missions he knew better than the editors reading them. The wooden bench he sat on every Friday afternoon was the last surviving item from the Delta Medical Squad. Each year, he would repaint it by hand, sanding down the old layer and covering it in a fresh coat of brown, then re-engraving the names of the 3 comrades who had died. This year, his hands shook too much, so the inscription, Raymond, Tuck, Eli, came out crooked. He just smiled sadly. My hands are old now, but the memory's still whole. The wooden cane he used, 92 centimeters long, carved from hickory wood taken from a small forest in South Carolina, where he once camped with his son, was a gift from Malcolm on his 65th birthday. On the cane, beneath the unit name, was another hand-carved line. A medic carries no gun, only hope. Whenever a child asked, he would just nod and tell a fairy tale about a soldier who healed hearts instead of wounding them. Corbin had never been on TV, never stepped into a medal ceremony. The Silver Star he was nominated for was postponed in 1973 for administrative reasons, and then vanished into a Level 3 classified file, never reopened. He didn't sue. He said, "Honor isn't something that needs paper. As long as I remember it, it still exists." Neighbors called him Uncle Corbin, brought him pastries, milk cartons, but they didn't know. Every scar on his arms marked a life once saved. One on the right shoulder, from a shell that ripped through as he shielded a 19-year-old private. A faint one on his left leg, from a snake bite while he was crossing a swamp to retrieve a lost radio. Even a stitched scar across his stomach, self-sutured under flashlight, with no clinic nearby. The last time he cried, it wasn't because of pain, but because a newspaper misprinted the name of the black soldier who died beside him in 1972. They wrote, Leonard White. His real name was Leviticus Wynn. Corbin mailed 3 handwritten letters with a photo enclosed. No one replied. And now, when a young police officer, someone young enough to be his grandson, sprayed paint onto his face in the middle of the street, he simply bowed his head. Not from shame, but because he knew. A man who has walked through hell never needs to bow to anyone. He bowed, out of shame for a country that once sent him to war, and then forgot he had survived. He didn't resist, didn't speak. But the eyes on the street began to widen, and the phones began recording. Corbin Winston was no longer invisible. A forgotten soldier was returning, not to be remembered, but to remind an entire generation. Some sins are not washed away by time. Every act of violence has a moment when it crosses the border of personal outrage to become a fracture in collective memory. And for all of America, the 23rd second of that video was exactly that fracture. The clip lasted exactly 31 seconds, filmed by a 16-year-old boy named Jeremy Dorsey, right at the corner of Lakehurst. He had originally been testing out the new slow-motion feature on his iPhone, but what Jeremy didn't expect was to capture a moment that could shake the entire system. No filters, no edits. Just exactly what happened before his eyes. The title he posted on TikTok was simple: "Cop sprays paint on old veteran. Broad daylight. No reason. No background music. No voiceover." In the video, there was only the hiss of red spray paint, the heavy crack as the wooden cane fell and split in two, and the unblinking gaze of the old black man, still seated, unresisting, his eyes locked on the lens, as if staring into the very conscience of the one filming. By exactly 1:12 p.m., the video had reached 128,000 views. Within 6 hours, that number jumped to 2.1 million. By midnight, it had been reshared more than 370,000 times, garnering over 89,000 comments, many from people who had never even heard of Lakehurst. A veteran named James Hawk Holloway, who had served in Con Tum in 1972, pinned the top comment. "I'm not mistaken. He's the one who pulled me out during that shelling, hands covered in blood but still smiling. And this punk calls him a zombie. This country has lost its mind." From Reddit to TikTok, from military forums to rapper Instagrams, all platforms reposted the video with one identical caption: "This is not okay." On Twitter, hashtags began trending rapidly. Corbin Winston 1971. The 23rd second. Dignity is not decor. A uniform is not a shield. In just 24 hours, over 3,100 American veterans confirmed having met Corbin Winston on different battlefields, from Laos, Quang Tri, to the hills of Pleiku. One even posted an old photo with him, knife in hand, mud and blood on his face, eyes still blazing. The caption read, "Now I understand why he stayed silent all his life. He had nothing left to prove." A group of final-year law students at UCLA recreated the entire incident in a 3D simulation as part of their thesis, titled, "The Right to be Respected by the Country You Risked Your Life For." Their model detailed every camera angle, audio wave frequency from the spray can, and a psychological analysis of crowd reaction, all within less than 30 seconds. At the Everyday Image Museum in Baltimore, a photographer named Clara Hughes printed the 23rd second frame at 1 meter by 1.5 meters, placing it in the center of the Grand Hall. No title, no explanation, just a small caption beneath the image. The truth needs no caption. The Monday edition of the Washington Post ran a front-page headline, "Who is Corbin Winston? And why did we let him be humiliated?" From the tech valleys of San Francisco to the corner bars of Atlanta, people weren't just talking about Bernie White's act of disgrace. They were talking about the calm silence of a man who should have been standing on a stage of honor, not sitting on a wooden bench, having red paint sprayed on his face in the street. A senior CNN editor said on the evening broadcast, "We don't need many words. We just need to stop at the 23rd second. Because in that moment, we realize too many people with the wrong skin tone have suffered the righteous image of a uniform." That clip didn't just capture the misconduct of a single officer. It posed a question to the entire country. Is dignity truly granted, or only acknowledged when it looks the way we prefer? And if a soldier like Corbin Winston is dismissed as an outdated decoration, then this nation is erasing everything it once called glory. Every country has names that need no introduction, just a word spoken, and the system rises to attention. Malcolm Winston was one of those names. Late in the afternoon, on the same day the 23rd second video reached 10 million views, a black armored SUV pulled up in front of the Lakehurst Police Department. No sirens, No entourage. The door opened, and a man stepped out. A dark gray tailored suit hugged his tall, lean frame. Black leather shoes polished to a mirror shine. No briefcase, no badges, no ID tag. He walked through the entrance, where 3 officers were huddled, discussing the now viral video. One of them, Rookie Officer Eric Halpern, raised a hand to stop him as protocol required. Malcolm didn't break stride. He glanced calmly at them, then placed his hand on the biometric scanner next to the internal security door. A second later, the green light flashed. The door swung open. No code, no ID needed. Silence dropped like lead. One voice whispered, "Who is he?" Another replied, voice shaking, "They call him the man who writes policy in soldiers' blood." His name was Malcolm Winston, the only son of Corbin Winston, a name once listed on the strategic operations team that shaped U.S. defense policy from 2001 to 2016, holding the position of Deputy Director of the National Office for Veterans Protection. The author of the 23rd Amendment, which required the federal system to safeguard the dignity of those who bled under the American flag, even if the nation has forgotten them. Throughout his 30-year career, Malcolm had never publicly acknowledged his father. He never appeared on Veterans Day, never spoke at military medic honors ceremonies. To him, Corbin was a father, not a symbol. But when the video spread across 19 international platforms, Malcolm didn't call anyone. He sent exactly 1 fax to the Department of Homeland Security, DHS headquarters, containing a single line. The man in the video, Corbin Winston, initiate full-spectrum trace. That fax woke up a web of dormant security systems. Level 6 National Security Alert was triggered. An order to restore all time-suppressed files was dispatched to the military archives at Fort Belvoir. Officer Bernie White's internal data was fully frozen, all access revoked, and his personnel file marked in red. Under purge, clearance suspended. Simultaneously, a copy of the video was sent for analysis at the Federal Behavioral Response Center, tasked with evaluating cases likely to provoke broad public reaction. Social psychology experts immediately concluded the subject's behavior is not merely racially motivated. It reflects power disorder, combined with symbolic violence tendencies. Without delay, Malcolm entered the Internal Oversight Division. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself, and upon entering, only one person stood to greet him, a former direct subordinate from 8 years ago, now Regional Director of Security. He sat down, arms folded, eyes locked on the surveillance lens. No shouting, no emotion, just one sentence. "I'm not here to demand justice for my father. I'm here to remind you what fear feels like, the kind that once kept this system from falling asleep at the wheel." And on the other side of the screen, monitoring systems began to ping. The 1971 Delta medical files were restored. The Silver Star recommendation, suspended for 52 years, reappeared under the name Corbin Winston. A file unlocked, once marked top secret, now revealed this line. This personnel once shielded live fire with his body. Recommend post-campaign honor. Malcolm didn't smile, didn't say thank you. He stood, gave a signal. You have 48 hours, or this system will relearn what real discipline means. Then he walked out, never looked back, and the entire building fell silent, as if a storm had passed through, leaving behind not rain, but a warning. In less than 36 hours after Malcolm Winston sent the top-secret fax, titled Corbin Winston, Federal Restoration Protocol, the entire federal system, long thought to be rusted by time, began to stir like a body jolted awake by high-voltage current. At the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, VI, where Corbin's file had once been shoved into a pending zone, the central servers emitted a strange sound. The screens lit up with a blazing red code. Priority override, level 7. Access triggered. This was an access level that hadn't been activated since 2012, during the post-Mosul veteran honor crisis. Data locked away for nearly half a century was recovered. The Silver Star nomination originally submitted for Corbin Winston in 1973. The Delta Mission Rescue Report, hand-signed by Captain Lindholm. A battlefield photo of Corbin, still wounded, carrying an injured comrade on his back. Meanwhile, at the Lakehurst police station, Officer Bernie White was casually sipping coffee in the records room, laughing with colleagues about cheap insults on the internet. He didn't know. The system had chosen that very day to strip everything bare. A string of old footage was retrieved from archival drives. Body cam footage from 2021 showing Bernie kicking a homeless man during a freezing night at Lakehurst Bus Depot. An overlooked internal report noting, victim identified as Gregory Malden, deceased due to hypothermia 4 months later, suspected complications from abdominal injury. No action was taken, because at the time, Bernie was still the son of a hero. But what was unearthed next was even more damning. A military file on Bernie himself revealed that he had never served a single day in the armed forces, despite publicly claiming on media platforms that he was a rear-line veteran. The truth: Bernie filed for draft deferment in 2014 using a fraudulent medical certificate. The paper had been stamped in Arkansas by a low-level legal assistant named R.L. McCreed, who later confessed, "I signed it to get it over with." Someone called saying he was the son of an officer who once saved a high-ranking man's life. The real shock came at midnight. The man Corbin Winston had saved in 1971 on Hill 689 was Captain Horace White, Bernie's father. When this information leaked, social media fury reached its peak. The 23rd-second video was remixed into hundreds of new clips, paired with Bernie's own words from a 2022 podcast. "I don't buy into the veteran myth. Everyone's got scars. Criminals have scars too." Back then, people laughed. Now, no one finds it funny. On Twitter, a wave of new hashtags exploded, spreading at a rate of 5,200 shares per minute. The man who never fought, filthy paint cop, honor thief, ghost with gravity. An anonymous former CIA operative appeared on the Shadow State podcast and said, "Malcolm doesn't need to warn the system. He is the warning. When the Winston name appears in a security network, every agency understands. There's no room left to retreat." In the third-floor corridor of the Pentagon, where only personnel of senator-level clearance or higher are allowed, security advisors began murmuring to each other. Corbin Winston isn't just a veteran, he's a legend who got buried. And when you bury someone too long, they turn into ghosts, and ghosts carry their gravity. From the system's perspective, Winston was no longer just an old man who had been humiliated. He was now the embodiment of a historic mistake that had never been corrected. And the most dangerous thing of all wasn't that he was still alive. It was that he had a son willing to make the system remember every wrong it ever tried to forget. Sometimes, a person can be forgotten by the system, but never by the memory of those they once saved. Just one day after Corbin Winston's identity was confirmed on national media, the recollections began pouring in like floodwaters breaching a levee. No fanfare, no cliches, just truth, raw and undeniable. A personal blog titled "Field Notes from a Forgotten Nurse" was posted at 2:16 a.m. by a user named Helen Kinley, 74 years old, a former Army nurse who served in Quang Tri. In the post, which ran under 600 words, she wrote, "In 1971, I dressed the wounds of a lieutenant whose abdomen had been torn open by shrapnel on Hill 689. The man who carried him out from the kill zone was an unarmed medic, the one the whole battalion called the walking doctor. His name was Corbin Winston, and that lieutenant was Horace White, the father of Officer Bernie White. The blog had only 304 followers during its 3 years of existence, but by 7 a.m. the next morning, it had been shared more than 400,000 times, cited by NPR, The Washington Post, and 3 accounts belonging to sitting members of Congress, with a caption that read, "A forgotten man doesn't mean an absent one." What followed was an unprecedented wave of remembrance in the history of military media. A former paratrooper in Kentucky sent CBS a handwritten letter. "I don't remember the names of everyone in my platoon, but the man who dug shrapnel out of my leg with a blood-stained bayonet, I remember exactly who he is. His name is Corbin Winston. I owe him one leg and the rest of my life." A veteran in Texas posted a 1972 photo of Corbin wrapping gauze around a young soldier's chest in a trench. The caption was heartbreakingly simple. "This man saved me, then disappeared." Now I know why he disappeared. The story continued to spread, without media orchestration. A petition to reinstate the Silver Star of Honor for Corbin Winston was launched on whitehouse.gov. In less than 36 hours, it had gathered 1.2 million signatures, and the number continued to climb by the second. The Veterans of Foreign Wars, VFW, issued an official press statement. "We support the restoration of honor to Medic Corbin Winston, a man who carried the weight of war's legacy in silence. Honor is not something to be distributed by social demand. It is the result of real sacrifice." Right on Lakehurst's main street, where the incident took place, residents erected a large mural overnight. On it, Corbin's broken wooden cane was painted in white on a black background, with bold text that read, "The cane broke. The spine did not." Street artists from Brooklyn, Chicago, and Oakland simultaneously began painting murals of Corbin, his eyes solemn, wearing a faded medic's cap, holding a medal without a ribbon, as if he had never been decorated and never needed to be to survive. At a high school in Nebraska, a 17-year-old student named Alana Torres printed the 23rd Second on T-shirts and launched a campaign called Honor the Right Way. For every shirt sold, $5 was donated to a local homeless veteran support fund. After 3 days, she had already sent $23,400 to the State Relief Center. CNN invited former Marine Jared Mason, 68, who had served in Laos, for an interview. He spoke briefly, each word like a blade. "He stitched my chest shut in a trench. I don't remember what the pain felt like, but now I do, because Bernie White just sprayed paint on my heart." The outrage spread, but this time it wasn't fueled by anger. It was a collective sense of guilt. People weren't just demanding an apology. They wanted a promise that it would never happen again, and a memory that would never fade. Corbin Winston was no longer the old man who got sprayed. He had returned, in every memory, in every scar he once helped save. Courts usually require lawyers, judges, and sworn oaths. But that morning, in a special conference room within Section C3 of the Federal Department of Justice, there was no gavel, no opening remarks, only a raw truth waiting to be proven. Malcolm Winston entered the room like a shadow from the center of America's conscience. He carried no assistant, no laptop, no phone. In his hand was a brown leather dossier, the kind hand-bound and issued only to cabinet-level security advisors. And inside, there were only 3 items: a copy of the Silver Star recommendation for Corbin Winston, stamped "Reviewed, Denied" in 1972, with no explanation. A photograph of the broken wooden cane, the words "Corbin 1971" flipped upward on concrete, and a USB drive attached to a keychain that once belonged to Corbin, engraved with the words, "Ghosts never ask for statues." The room was fully staffed with representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs, Department of Defense, Homeland Security, the FBI, and the National Office of Law Enforcement Oversight. At the head of the table sat Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security, Mr. Marquez Hollow, who began with a carefully prepared justification. We are committed to reviewing the entire award evaluation process. This incident is an unfortunate exception, but it does not reflect the system as a whole. Malcolm showed no reaction. He quietly opened the USB and projected onto the large screen the 31-second video. Bernie White, kicking and breaking Corbin Winston's cane, his face grinning like he'd just conquered a trophy. At second 15, the snap rang out, sharp and cold. Everyone in the room held their breath. No words, no soundtrack, only the sound of humiliation, quieter than gunfire. Malcolm turned off the screen. He didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten. He simply placed the close-up photo of the broken cane at the center of the table and asked, "If you don't even know where the fracture lies, then don't try to glue back what's already shattered." One council member asked cautiously, "What do you want?" Prosecution, suspension, an official apology. Malcolm paused, then replied, each word hard as cold steel. "I want nothing for myself. I just want you to understand. This is not an incident. This is a test, and your entire system has failed without needing a verdict." In the far right corner of the room, an FBI representative leaned toward a colleague and whispered just loud enough for one person to hear. He doesn't represent any agency, but I think the entire country is about to follow him. After this. The meeting didn't last long, but the consequences rippled far and wide. That very afternoon, an indefinite suspension order was issued for Officer Bernie White, not for assault, not for procedural misconduct, but for a reason never before recorded in administrative files. Suspended due to breach of public ethics and law enforcement honor. Media across the country reported it simultaneously. At a brief press conference held by the Department of Defense, for the first time in 23 years, a leaked report revealed that at least 14,378 black veterans had had their honorable medal recommendations delayed or denied, despite meeting all criteria. CNN closed its 9 p.m. broadcast with a scrolling headline. This time, the man without a gun fired the most painful shot. No one saw Corbin Winston in any boardroom or press conference. He didn't rise to declare anything, didn't give interviews, didn't demand his medal back. But everyone understood. His quiet nod was the greatest hearing this nation had ever witnessed. That morning, Bernie White, a former Lakehurst police officer, was summoned to a closed disciplinary hearing. No prior notice, no legal representation, no media cameras. He arrived in a wrinkled gray dress shirt, no badge, no lanyard, no firearm, and most importantly, no power left. The steel door of the conference room opened. Inside sat 11 people, representatives from the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Veterans Alliance, and 3 statewide police conduct oversight agencies. No one greeted him, not a single look of goodwill. Bernie sat down, facing a file nearly 200 pages thick, labeled in bright red. Unfit for badge, inhuman enforcement behavior. On the very first page were 3 images. A frame of him kicking and breaking Corbin's wooden cane, a photo of the falsified military deferment form from 2015, and a data map analyzing Bernie's encounters with black individuals, 87% marked heightened threat level, despite no presence of weapons. One council member, a Fallujah war veteran missing an arm, stood up. He stared at Bernie in silence for several seconds, then raised his remaining arm, pointed directly at him, and said, voice hoarse, "Corbin Winston carried your father out of hell, feet soaked in blood. And you sprayed paint on his head like it was a joke. You think you were enforcing the law, or mocking the very people who once carried its weight so you could exist. Bernie tried to respond, voice choked, shaking, defensive. I was just doing my job. I didn't think he was anyone special. No one replied. No one needed to. Another council member slowly shook their head and said, "If by 27 you still can't recognize a dignified man when you see one, you don't need a badge. You need a mirror." That line was never entered into the official transcript, but it echoed across the field like a code of moral conduct. The verdict was read aloud in a flat, unwavering voice, each word hammered into the remains of his lost honor. Permanent revocation of enforcement authority. Barred from serving in any protective capacity, including civilian. Record to be archived under special classification. Category D, ethical disqualification. All access to security databases, biometric duty prints, internal ID cards, and system credentials was disabled within 90 seconds. The wall screen flashed red as his final account was permanently terminated. As Bernie walked out of the room, silent and with his head down, the hallway seemed twice as long as usual. At the far end, a young female recruit, likely no older than 22, pointed toward him and asked a colleague, "Who's that?" The reply came in a single sentence, nothing added, nothing left out. "No one." That was a system error. The media rarely mentioned Bernie's name after that. He became a footnote in the officer training curriculum of the Ohio State Academy. Case 54B, a symbol of moral failure. No uniform is thick enough to cover an ego that thin. And his name, now, was no longer spoken with fear or respect, but as a warning. Bernie White became living proof that 1 minute of disgrace can erase a lifetime of false authority, and a name once worn with pride is now only used to prevent history from repeating itself. That early morning, with thick fog still blanketing the ground in Lakehurst, a matte black SUV with no license plates silently pulled up in front of an old brick house at the end of Bowden Street. No sirens, no spectacle. The only person to step out was Malcolm Winston, returning to his father's house for the first time in nearly 18 years. He brought with him something seemingly worthless in the world of classified briefings and biometric encryption, a blue cloth handkerchief embroidered with gold thread. At first glance, it looked ordinary, but anyone who had served in federal tactical response units knew what it meant. A hand-passed symbol, reserved only for those who had repaid blood debts with honor. Malcolm didn't knock. He didn't need to. Corbin Winston was already sitting on the wooden chair out on the porch, as he always did, beneath the shade of the nearly 70-year-old oak tree. His gaze drifted into the distance, not weary, but heavy, as if history had just been lifted from his shoulders, yet he didn't know where to place it down. Malcolm approached, saying nothing. He poured a bowl of warm water from the thermos he brought, unfolded the handkerchief, dipped it in, and knelt. With his own hands, he gently wiped away the remaining traces of red paint, not much, but stubborn, staining the gray-blue sleeve of his father's shirt, where the Delta Medical 1971 unit patch had once been defaced. Corbin didn't look at his son, but he placed his hand on Malcolm's shoulder, very slowly, very gently, as if in a silent rite of passage, with no oath, no speech. No one cried. No one needed to say, "Thank you." That touch, in the silence, weighed more than any medal. Inside the small house, there were no commendations on the wall, no medals, no folded flags. Only one black and white photograph, simply framed in wood. Corbin Winston, 1971, crouching in the smoke of battle, dressing a young soldier's wounds, unarmed, face streaked with blood and dust. That photo wasn't returned by Malcolm. It had arrived by post, sender unknown. On the back, a handwritten note, recovered from classified archives, not to be forgotten. In the 2 days that followed, Over 400 bouquets were placed in front of Corbin's home. No cards, no messages, just flowers. From white tulips to bougainvillea, from wild blossoms of the north to the purple orchids of Georgia. Across the street, in front of the barber shop where Bernie had once sprayed paint, a small bronze plaque was mounted to the brick wall. The engraving was simple, unadorned. Here stood a man who said nothing, but made a nation listen. No television network interviewed Corbin. He declined every invitation, even those from major outlets like CNN and The Atlantic. He gave no speeches, made no social media appearances, and accepted no awards. But one day before National Veterans Day, the White House quietly released a statement. Mr. Corbin Winston will be awarded the Silver Star of Honor Restored under Protocol 23B. The ceremony was held in the Roosevelt Room, discreet, untelevised, with only 12 attendees, just as Corbin requested. No flags waving high, no brass bands. The President of the United States, holder of the world's highest office, stepped forward, stood upright before Corbin Winston, and raised a formal military salute. Once, and only once. There was no speech, no cameras, because Corbin Winston didn't need the spotlight to be seen. His silence, kept for half a century, was finally answered by the only thing he ever deserved. Honor, not through words, but through eternity. On the large screen of PBS during the National Veterans Day broadcast, it wasn't images of tank parades or marching soldiers that appeared, but an old, faded medical insignia etched with the words, Combat Medic, Vietnam 1971, placed at a slant on cracked oak wood. No spotlight, no special effects. Yet it glowed in a way only history could ignite. That insignia belonged to Corbin Winston, and it didn't shine, because it reflected the fracture this nation once tried to forget. Malcolm Winston, the son who had shaken the entire security apparatus with a single fax, declined all interview requests after the honor was reinstated. No television appearances, no CNN broadcasts, no memoirs. The only thing he left behind was a bolded sentence in an internal memo sent to all federal agencies. My father doesn't need forgiveness. He needs a country that never does this to anyone again. And from that single sentence, a wave of change began. Police academies from Maryland to Colorado launched a new course titled Ethics in Memory. For the first time, the 23rd second clip was included as required material, accompanied by a question with no correct answer. If you were holding the paint can, would you stop? At a public hearing in Congress, Senator Alvarez, once a combat medic in the Iraq War, addressed over 500 attendees. Honor cannot be spray-painted, but it can be forgotten if we do nothing. The entire room rose, not to applaud, but to be silent. That year, the Veterans Parade in Lakehurst had no floats, no political banners. But when Corbin Winston's faded cap appeared in the crowd, the whole street stood up, automatically, without command. The host simply said, Corbin Winston, a man who never needed to be saluted. But today, everyone is on their feet. In Virginia, the Federal Army Museum opened a new exhibit, the 23rd Second, a stark white room, absolutely silent, designed so that visitors felt their breathing was too loud. At the center stood a replica of the broken wooden cane, engraved with the words once carved into the original. A medic carries no weapon, only hope. There were no captions, no audio guides, only a single line engraved on a small bronze plaque beneath the glass. If you have to ask what happened, you may not be ready to understand. The name Corbin Winston, once struck from the 1972 medal eligibility list due to an unclear internal process, is now etched into the black granite of the National Veterans Memorial, just below the names of those who served, but were never acknowledged. Not placed at the top, not gilded in gold, just a deep inscription, steadfast, silent, indelible. His story did not end with fanfare. It ended with a quiet, unyielding reminder. Silence does not mean weakness. Sometimes it is the roar of history, waiting for a nation brave enough to hear it again. And this time, it seems America has listened. But what about you? Can you hear that silence? Something has finally begun to change. Join us in sharing these meaningful stories by hitting the like button and subscribing. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with powerful lessons and sincere empathy.